Hello and welcome to the newest edition of the New Stack Makers podcast. This week we are recording and live streaming live from the KubeCon+CloudNativeCon Europe conference being held this week in Barcelona. And today we're going to talk about container security and cloud native security. What's the latest on what is happening in that field? We have two guests with us today. We have Chris Aniszczyk, the CTO of the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. And also we have Justin Cormack, who is a security engineer at Docker. Welcome, gentlemen.
Awesome. Glad to be here.
Nice to be here, yes.
Excellent, excellent. So I understand the CNCF is doing a lot of work around security, and I kind of want to delve into that first. You guys are running audits on tell us about that.
CNCF is what I call a full service foundation. So we help our projects with, not only, websites or hosting events like we are at KubeCon today, but we do also help them perform, security audits. So we go contract with kind of third-party firms to give projects kind of an independent run on, have someone externally look at your code, do some, potential threat modeling, pen testing, and so on, and give those results to the project, make sure that their security disclosure process works, and the project themselves are able to address any concerns that are hit, because as essentially a graduation requirement for our projects is they must be able to, have a security disclosure process and also be able to survive independent security audit. And what's also kind of cool is we also open source and share these reports and results with the world, which is generally kind of fairly rare for open source projects.
But also it's kind of cool that you're doing them for the sandbox projects and early stage projects as well, which are not just for when things are graduating. And I think that's really nice, because there's a lot that new projects can learn when they're starting up about security from having an audit. Mm-hmm. They've probably never had one before. Yeah. Often they've got a lot more to learn maybe than later stage projects, and can set them in the right direction for the future as well, which I think is really nice.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just like, there's an old saying that, most people don't think about security until kind of later on in the product life cycle. Open source projects kind of fall in the same rope. So doing it kind of a little bit earlier in the stage helps them set them up for success, later on. And it's been a fun experiment. I think we've run almost, 12 security audits across different CNCF projects.
Can you say which ones have been audited already?
Jaeger, we've done Container D,
Envoy, Nats, Notary and Tough,
Kubernetes.
Prometheus is in process.
Almost done.
Okay.
That one's a big one. That one's going to be a lot of fun. Yeah. So almost done. So we've done a lot. We publish them and share them in our kind of annual report too. But any project that has gone through an audit, they publish the results in their kind of main project repo and kind of link to it in the security section of the README is generally kind of the process that we
Terrific. Follow. What sort of things are they looking? What sort of vulnerabilities are they looking for?
Well, whatever they can find. I mean, it's the projects are all really different, so it's actually kind of interesting. And I just did a talk on the results of them, so you can catch up on when the video's out. But it was I think there's all sorts of different projects. I think. And you have to focus when you're doing an audit on the things that are relevant to that kind of thing. So, for example, for Core DNS, there was a really interesting issue there around caching. So, Core DNS has a caching plugin for DNS entries, but if you didn't actually check that the result that came back from the upstream DNS server was actually for the same address that it was the request had come in. So you could poison the cache with, if you somehow managed to get it to call your DNS server by getting someone to do a lookup for you, you could put back an entry to say for Google's DNS server, and then it would be caught. So it's always, checking for untrusted input was one of those things that came up a lot of times. There was a bunch of interesting results on Nats with the because Nats has a C client, and writing C code is really hard. And even though Nats is a really simple protocol, really nice simple protocol, they were still, most of the issues found in Nats were in the C client. And there was, kind of a lot of the projects in the reports just said written in Go, can't find much.
It's a little maybe a little biased there, but
but I mean, it was definitely issues with that. And I know there was a bunch of issues around cross-site scripting and things like that and APIs as well.
Yeah, I think it depends on the project. Because like as you said, they're all kind of different, right? Some may not even like expose a port or have like an HTTP thing. Like Container D is kind of a little bit lower.
Container D is a weird one because it fits right in the middle of something. And I think there was one of the things that came up there, which I talked about, was really what's the scope of the security surface for Container D? It's very unclear, and I think the auditors found it a bit unclear. And I think it's something that we need to clarify a bit in advance because I think it's kind of small, but there are little bits that feed through from Kubernetes where, for example, there might be denial of service attacks based on the config that you pass through from Kube. For example, that maybe might be an issue, but it's those kinds of attack surface that you need to understand because the only issue they found with Containerd was around its config file, which is probably not the most important thing to look at, but I think it's kind of useful thing to find, but it was the scope was a bit unclear there.
Yeah.
So it sounds like for the auditing companies, cloud native computing components can be kind of a challenge as well, given
it's a new space for some. Like it's kind of been entertaining because when we reached out to kind of a lot of vendors out there, we're like, we want to share and open source the results, and not a lot of them were used to that because a lot of it is companies pay for an audit and the results are shared internally, and that's basically about it, or they're shared potentially with partners or clients, but none of them really open source results, which is kind of unfortunate because there's a lot of cool things that could be shared in lessons across different projects and communities. So I'm hoping CNCF kind of maybe leads the charge and convinces more companies that, like, some companies actually do audits on open source stuff they use anyway, but they never share those necessarily, results or the full report. They may share a CV or two from the actual report, but you don't
it also means a lot of developers, unless they've actually been through an audit process internally or something, I've never seen what an audit looks like.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's been part of the fun process of projects. Or like we were doing one for Fluent D, and Eduardo, the maintainer there, was like, what do I do? I have to like do interviews with these folks. How does it work? Like he just has never kind of been through one, so it's kind of been fun to watch that experience.
But it's good to post them for everyone because I guess then if you're a larger company, you could just go ahead and fix the bugs yourself. And ideally, I guess maybe
they're generally all major severe issues will be fixed before we publish the actual report. I mean, the process is actually happening now with Kubernetes right now, where the report is. The audit's about finalized, so the report's being written and all the issues are being pushed upstream, and any relevant CVEs will be created. So we're hoping to share that report probably in a couple of months, 1 or 2 months, hopefully. So,
but obviously that part of the process can't really be done in public because you could find a really severe vulnerability and it needs to be fixed before So, but afterwards you can publish that.
Where would users find these reports once they are posted?
So almost every there's 2 places. One, in every CNCF annual report, we link to them directly as part of the where does the funding go and what do we spend money and best practice. And almost every main repo has a kind of in their README. Just look for security and you'll find the audit usually linked off. That's kind of what we teach and coach our projects to.
Nice, fantastic. Well, this leads me to our second topic, and so CNCF started a special interest group for security. Yep. And what does this mean? What's the goals?
Well, there was a couple things that was going on. One, CNCF was dealing with an issue where we've grown so much as a community, not only in terms of like projects, but members and just more individual contributors. We have a very small TOC or technical board that kind of acts as the technical stewards and vision of like all of CNCF, and they were getting a little bit overloaded in terms of work. And so what's the kind of natural solution to this? You kind of try to distribute and scale out the problem in different spaces. So we went and created a new process to form specific focus areas. We call them special interest groups, SIGs. This is nothing new. Like Kubernetes has SIGs, other open source projects kind of do these things. So we created that to kind of spread out and have focus areas. And so one of the first kind of pilot SIGs that we did initially was around security, and it's all kind of dedicated and sharing practices, coming up with what works at different projects, actually having a group of people that are security minded and actually maybe doing some type of basic audits themselves on projects.
Yeah, we're doing assessments rather than
Yeah,
audits.
audits. Yeah, I guess that's a proper
So
proper
we're
word.
kind of covering what the scope of the project is, sort of architecturally, how security affects it, and laying a sort of groundwork to make it easier to do the audits, but not actually doing pen testing or code review directly, but but writing a summary that explains to people what the security architecture is, what matters, how you should use this project. You know, finding issues around, you know, is it easy to use the project correctly? Is it understandable what the security surface is? You know, as a user, if I want to use this, what do I need to know before I start from the security point of view, so that end users can be, you know where to start when they pick up a project, when they've, when they want, you know, once you start using it, and they're like, well, what can I give my security people to look at to say about this project?
Yeah, I think it's great because, you know, we're starting to collect some more security related projects in CNCF, right? So like we kind of started earlier on with, like, you know, maybe Notary, Tough, and there's Spiffy, Spire, depending if you consider policy part of security, there's OPA. So we're getting more of these kind of security related projects, and there's kind of one, you know, focus area for them to come and collaborate with each other and share practices and discuss that. I think it's
But
awesome.
and also, I mean, you know, for us to look at new security-related projects, so that the TOC, who are mostly not security people, can say someone's looked at this and says it's not a stupid idea.
So it sounds like part of the goal also is to get all the different projects kind of thinking along the same lines for security best practices.
Sharing practices and, you know, from essentially experts in the field, I think is useful. Like, I mean, some of my like kind of goals with the security SIG is, you know, if they come up with some, you know, cool ideas of potentially of how to improve. We have this thing called the Core Infrastructure Best Practices Badging Program at the Linux Foundation, and that does have kind of like a lot of basic. It's kind of like a checklist of things you should do, and if the security SIG comes up with some improvements, I would love to feed those back to the best practices badge, which is starting to be used more and everywhere. And it's just, you know, checklist is not going to solve everything, but it is useful for developers to.
Yeah, I mean, the best practice badge is actually really valuable, and a lot of projects have been really happy that they've implemented it. I think it starts you thinking about a lot of things and thinking about formalizing processes and gaps and things. You know, so it's a lot of projects have really benefited from that a lot.
Yeah, no, it's great. So I'm excited to have that, you know, group. We basically just started the security SIG and storage SIG will be our first kind of two SIGs in CNCF, and then we're going to go create some, you know, the rest of them essentially.
But yeah, we've had a bunch of meetings here, and we've already had lots of asks for things, and you know, people can open issues on security SIG, and we can look into how to support them. I mean, you know, there's a lot of people who are involved in that now, so there's a lot of resource. If people, you know, if your project decides you need to implement something with cryptography, and you want someone to look at the cryptography and say, that's not stupid, we have enough people that we can find someone who can say,
make a judgment call.
Now, in addition to the CNCF projects, will there be, or is there interest from other end users out there who might join?
So I've seen some vendors and end users start participating. I mean, Justin may have a better call.
I talked to a bunch of people today, and they're either they're end users who are using projects internally and they want to participate more, or they're you know, we talked to some vendors who are running they have a Kubernetes distro, and they want to work with us to build tooling around how to, you know, make sure that it's secure and things like that. So there's a load of work for, you know, that we can do to help people in all sorts of different pieces of the ecosystem who have a security interest, which is pretty much everyone.
And you know, we also, you know, since we're talking a little bit about SIGs, we also started, you know, we have an end user community in CNCF that has, you know, a good amount of people in it, and they recently started SIGs around, like, you know, like a financial vertical, right? And so there's a lot of kind of you know, banks, insurance companies, you know, everyone in this finance space that are kind of meeting together to share practices and concerns, you know, kind of with, you know, their cloud native stack. And the idea is to feed some of those requirements that they have maybe around, like, you know, your financial firm, like auditing and governance of things is super important because it's a regulated industry. So the more they could feed, you know, that back potentially to the security SIG, which could go and advise, projects to improve things, I think is great. So
Yeah,
I'm
I mean,
kind of excited.
people's requirements do have a lot of commonality, and financials have similar requirements around security, and other industries do, and so bringing those together is really valuable because.
I would imagine, especially, number one, I find it interesting that particular verticals are now kind of rising up, because every vertical, finance, government, they all have their particular needs.
Yeah, and it's one of the original intentions when we created CNCF is to have a group that, for end users that they go collaborate and share practices, technically away from vendors. Like, vendors are not allowed in that space, so it's just, it's interesting. Companies in a similar spaces like talking to each other and sharing practices, so.
That's almost a second level of security. I know there's general security, but when you get in the government and finance, they get real hyper paranoid about making sure everything is locked down.
Everyone has different needs, and
but yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of there's a lot of important pieces that people need, and there's and I had a really interesting conversation today about supply chain security, which lots of people are incredibly interested in. Notary is part of that, but we're also looking at some other projects around that.
Graphius and there's a lot of folks that are.
And there's a lot of. It's really important because if your whole infrastructure is defined from code, anything can be changed for anything, and anything could suddenly become insecure because someone makes a mistake or something's hacked or changed. I think those people are realizing that there's whole bits of, in a very dynamic environment, security and policy have to be very dynamic and automated as well.
Absolutely.
So there's way more stuff that we haven't got that we need to.
Terrific. And you had mentioned something about a bug bounty that you guys are considering.
We're doing a bug bounty pilot in Kubernetes, at least. So we've partnered with HackerOne, and the Kubernetes product security team, or PST, is essentially working with them kind of in a private beta, testing out the platform and kind of working with the researchers on that platform. If things go well, we may kind of open it up to the world and so on. But right now they're in kind of what we call private beta, private research, to see how that goes. Bug bounties are good and bad.
The container escape.
There's another kind of project that we're working on, a container escape bounty. As the world depends on container technology, you have folks maybe, let's say you're a Netflix or I don't know, almost Facebook running on containers. If you have an escape there, it could potentially cost you a ton of money, a ton of resources, so we're potentially looking at launching a container escape bounty in the year where we would have an environment for people to go, play with, exploit, and see if they could kind of crack out or, escape. And, we'll definitely work with the communities and ensure if there is any issues found, it is addressed and fixed in kind of a timely manner. But it is a fun kind of experiment for us. So.
And container escape is problematic because you're escaping into the host OS.
You get root privileges, I guess.
You get all the other containers.
Yeah, but it's also, a lot of the container escape stuff is really Linux kernel vulnerability stuff as well.
Correct.
So it kind of crosses with a lot of the Linux Foundation work on hardening Linux
kernel
as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's just something that we're looking to emphasize and advertise a little bit more to get people a little bit more interested, because there's some organizations that kind of let's say they have their own security type things. If you find a kernel bug, you could potentially report it to Google, and Google will pay money. The idea with the container escape bounty is to kind of maybe pull some of these resources together from not only the traditional clouds and Googles of the world, but other companies and users that may also benefit from this, because we're all kind of it's a shared interest. We're all in this together. Not one company should bear the burden too much, in my opinion.
Terrific. Justin, while I got you here, I'm wondering if you could offer an update on the latest. A few weeks back, Docker Hub, we got word from Docker that Docker Hub was a part of the user database was breached, and they notified the users right away. But at DockerCon, where we heard about this first, or right before DockerCon, Docker had said, okay, we're going to give you up-to-date basically a report on what happened and how the breach happened. Anyway, I was wondering if there's any update, anything else to add.
Yeah, the report should be out fairly soon now. We're just kind of but yeah, it was. Breaches are kind of one of these things that you have to be prepared for. It's obviously you don't want anything like that to happen, but and this was a very minor one, and nothing was actually compromised of any significance, but it does, make you think about the process of how you deal with security incidents in practice, because they happen all the time. And how you also things like how you survive compromise. Can you do things like rotate credentials easily? And all these things that come that part of the whole cloud native journey is being able to, respond to things effectively and be able to change your infrastructure. Rotate key rotation and key update and managing key compromise is something that shouldn't be something you never do. The more often you can rotate keys, the better, and the easier it is for the users of your product to rotate keys and so on. So I think there's we kind of although it was a very minor incident, and we were just being very paranoid about about that. We there's a lot of things that came out of that that makes you think about and understand bits of your infrastructure and work out where things can be made better and where things people don't rotate credentials. I mean, the passwords that are breached were only the ones that hadn't been changed for 5 years. And people don't. People do have these reluctance to actually change things.
It happens in many organizations, right? Hopefully, you had a chance to practice it before you have to go live. I'm generally a big proponent of the kind of the notion of game days or security game days where you could potentially go through a not a real incident, but potentially a game day incident around this, and just make sure you're kind of prepared and test. This is why EMSs and people do drills and other things to make sure that they're actually fully prepared. So I'm sure Docker, generally security conscious company, I think they've handled the incident really well, and the more organizations prepare, I think we're all the kind of better off. But
I mean, it's kind of sort of fits in a way with the sort of chaos engineering approach to things. Have people attacking you, kind of have internal people attacking, kind of understand what happens when things go wrong, because otherwise, if you don't practice,
red teams and all those concepts. I think more of the industry adopting that would be a good thing, especially cloud native land. Things tend to be very dynamic and changing, and you have to be able to.
Well, this is the first time in a while I've heard about supply chain security, and I think the first time in this context of if we have this stuff that's interconnected, we need greater controls, more nuanced controls about how they interact, and I think a lot of people are starting to think about that because
no, absolutely. I mean, I think that and for many people, the supply chain has become a weak link, and so it's becoming exploited much more. There's been some really kind of serious attacks on supply chain recently. The things like there was a great article in Wired about Maersk and how they got affected by the NotPetya attack, and that was very much a supply chain attack, attacking a weak point of software distribution. And that's one of the reasons why I'm a maintainer on Notary. Notary is about part of that supply chain piece, but we're also Six Security are doing some work on Intoto, which is another project, which is
what was this one called?
Intoto, which is designed to support an earlier part of the chain where you're actually doing build artifacts and making sure that the build artifacts have not been compromised, and this stuff's becoming much more important, and everything that happens from the developer's laptop to production is a potential risk point just as much as the stuff after production.
And it's becoming very automated and fast. So stuff happens incredibly fast these days and gets deployed automatically and all this stuff. So being able to roll back and audit everything is super critical.
Terrific. Speaking of, it does definitely seem like a new security landscape out there. And we've been getting a lot of interest over Google's zero trust model. And this is different from the typical, I think it was described yesterday in one of the keynotes. The traditional approach is the castle moat where you put up a firewall. But once you get through the firewall, you get all the the squishy good stuff.
Yeah, crunchy on the outside, soft on the inside.
Yeah.
But I mean, zero trust, and it relies heavily on authentication and just like hardening each of the applications. But is this a good approach for cloud native computing? Is this something that users should keep in mind?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's increasingly there are no physical firewalls. There are only software-defined firewalls again. So again, you can't necessarily rely on them always being there in the right place, and you can't. You've got to be able to be hardened against someone compromising one piece of the infrastructure and not letting them compromise everything. Again, it's this resilience and compromise resistance is incredibly important because things will. There will be security incidents, things will be broken. Yeah. Little bits of, if someone gets into one container, they will...
you pivot over.
They pivot, and it's like making sure that the least privilege in that container so that you haven't got any more credentials that get you anywhere else.
Correct.
And that everything is individually hardened so that there's no attack surface once you've got a little bit of the way in. Zero Trust is also really interesting because there's a whole lot of pieces around, learning what's normal behavior and abnormal behavior and how users log in. I mean, there's some examples. The O'Reilly Zero Trust book has got some really great examples.
Nice.
I really like it. Evan, go on.
We can link to that.
But it's got some examples, like it's not normal for a developer to do Git commits from their mobile phone. There's probably something weird happening if that's going on. Maybe you need to do extra, just do an extra check and, see if you can make sure it really is the
You just don't merge pull requests from your phone? Just
I don't.
I'm just joking.
I never log into GitHub from my phone, which is kind of frustrating sometimes because you can't see some of the information, but it's like, I don't feel that it's the right security place to be doing code, and it also it's quite difficult to do code review on the screen.
It is true, yeah.
But there's patterns of use, and there's patterns of. There's a lot of the stuff with the Google stuff has been about device management, and is this your laptop? Is it in the office or is it in a coffee shop? Do I have to take extra precautions if it's in a coffee shop because it's I don't trust the environment it's in so much, and if you go to that's why when Google asks you more questions if you go to a foreign country that you haven't been to before, and those kinds of things. There's a lot of environmental information, and there's lots of kind of machine learning pieces that feed into that, which haven't really been used for security things in that kind of way before. So I think it's kind of interesting. But it's also it's still very new for a lot of people, and people ask me questions like, how do I implement this? What do I do? And it's like, it's not defined. You have to think about it in your own context.
Yep.
All right, gentlemen, thank you so much for catching us up to speed on the latest in cloud native security. And thank you, watchers and viewers and listeners, for tuning in.
Absolutely.